seconds and then jump back up for you. Should work. There we go.
Good evening. We're going to open the meeting for the City of Walker Planning Commission for December 7. First item on the agenda is reviewing the meeting minutes from the meeting on 11/16/22. Any comments, corrections, changes? Motion to
Make a motion to approve.
motion approved by Scott,
Support.
supported by Tyler. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. At this point, this is an opportunity for general public comment. So if there's anyone out there that's the general public that would like to comment, please come forward. No takers. We'll move on to the one and only item on the agenda, case number 22-021. This was tabled on July 20. So our first order of business here is to entertain a motion to take it off the table.
I'll make a motion to remove it from the table.
Second.
Motion by Tyler, supported by Scott, to remove this project from the table, and all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. With that, I'd like to turn to Frank Wash, our Community Development Director, and kind of introduce the project at hand, or reintroduce it, as the case may be.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. And this is a planning commission meeting. So it's not a joint work session per se like we had last time with the city commission. So I think Terry put it in, laid it out there fairly well. I do want to make a couple of clarification comments. At the 7:20 planning commission meeting, by a 5-1 vote, planning commission recommended the rezonings go forward to city commission. There's been no action on that at the city commission because the other side of the outcome was let's do a work session. So that's in a holding pattern. I do want to ask, and maybe this is something that you guys can address during your presentation, did the CPUD legal description change from the first version? I don't know if it has or hasn't, but that's something that I'll ask you to check, because if it did, I haven't been involved in this project all the way, so I'm kind of jumping in the middle. But that was something that we were looking at today, and we were like, I wonder if that changed. And so if it has, then we'll have to renotice the hearing anyway, because we didn't notice this for a public hearing. This was, I thought that was already done. But so that's a procedural thing. You know, it's something that we can clarify either tonight or at another time. But if the CPUD legal description did change, then just by publication standards, we'll need to renotice a public hearing, and you'll look at the rezoning again because it will have changed. For the PASP tonight, which is really the focus, I think Scott and I both in our staff reports tried to put some kind of structure together for you folks tonight, and we called out what we call the big 3 items for you to discuss. And what it comes down to is there are 2 transportation related issues, and then there's 1 planning issue. The planning issue is the look and design of the commercial frontage along M45. So the applicants provided you with a SketchUp model and then also an updated pattern book to show how they would design and develop that area lot by lot. Everyone would be bound to those documents. So I give them credit for doing that because it helps explain and visualize what would be proposed there. The other 2 items are transportation related, so I'm really going to let Scott Connors handle those and talk about how the city and MDOT reviewed some things. And we do have City Attorney Cliff Bloom here tonight, and he's sitting in for Jeff Sluggett, but Cliff is more than qualified, and we've had some discussions just to get up to speed on the right-of-way issue for Ferndale south of M45. Those are the big 3 issues for you tonight. I encourage you to focus on those. Other than those 3 items, which are significant, I think there's more than enough content on this in this entire application, you know, that the PASP application can be considered complete. But subject to the clarification and discussion and decisions by the Planning Commission for those big 3 items. So what we've done is asked the developer to present to you folks on updates that they've made to their plans. since the work session that we had, if you remember back in August, we sat around the table with the city commission and kind of redlined the plans and came up with some comments. So I will get out of the way and let them do that. I encourage you to interact with these folks, and Scott and I will chime in as necessary. Scott, if you want to, I don't know if you want to wait to jump in or if you want to.
I can wait.
All right, we're going to wait and we'll respond as according to your discussion. Okay, thank you.
There, it's red. So I think we're good. My name is Todd Grassman with JAG Development in Vista 45. I'm the president of the developing company. And then we've got our whole team here. The team here is basically here in case we got any detailed questions. I think the first question is did the CPUD legal description change? It did. We had those 2 lots in the previous one that were sort of tucked into by the commercial there. Or I'm sorry, by the apartments there. And we made them 1 lot, so that definition did change a little bit. Brandon, if that works, Scott, with you, he'll get you the new definition, legal description for it, and we'll forward that to you. But that's been modified, and it's in the current existing plan that was put in front of you. Frank asked me to quick go through and just say, hey, what were some of the changes we did? So what I'll do is I'll run through that, and then I think we're sort of set up on the same page you guys are, where we're going to talk about the 3 large items that Frank identified in the planning memorandum. The first thing that we did, and I'm working off the pattern book. So the pattern book was the updated one. We've done quite a bit of work. We've updated it for what we did, the discussions we had in the joint planning meetings that we had with you guys. So it's the pattern book, and if you go to pages 3, 4, and 5 are primarily where we can see just sort of a summary of what we've updated. First thing we did is we did address the outstanding items that were in Tricia Anderson's planning report from last time. There were a pretty lengthy list of, hey, we need this fixed, corrected. We've done all those items. We did also commit to take the wetlands into a protected under protection or preservation easement. We've talked about expanding the right-of-way on M45 where you turn into the Goodwill. Now, one thing I'll try to be very careful on tonight, but just so we're all on the same page, I'll try to refer to Goodwill Industries as the west entrance, and I will try to refer to the entrance, the Ferndale entrance, as the Ferndale entrance. If you're looking at documents, though, they're both considered Goodwill. Myers Real Estate Company is called Goodwill, and Goodwill Industries is on the west. So I'll just refer to them as the Goodwill Industries access point and then the Ferndale access point, so we're all on the same page. But we have gone through, and on the Goodwill Industries site, we've got the right-of-way, and we've worked with Ottawa County and Talmadge Township to make sure that we've got the tapering on that side too, that we can meet the engineering requirements there. We updated the traffic study and then updated the reports for the changes that we had talked about. We've added the 6 acres that was to the south that had the residential piece. You know, we had that residential component we talked about. We defined what that is. It's put on the 6 acres. We added that to the traffic study. We also made the changes for some of the discussions we had on uses and what was going to be there, what wasn't, and then the building locations. And then just working with Scott, we updated the traffic study for that. We spent a fair amount of time. There was some commissioner discussion and recommendations on trying not to make the apartment piece so linear. So what we did is we redesigned the apartment residential piece, the sort of medium density residential, and we put it around the pond. Before, that was sort of down the west side there. The access road, the northwest road, was right up against the pond. We brought the apartment buildings around the pond, and that was sort of part of the layout rationale for that commercial lot that changed just a little bit. We spent a lot of time on the pattern book. We defined what the buildings are going to look like. We defined the architecture behind it. We spent some time on that model that we sent. And we just tried to define, okay, what is the DDA components? What are those components that are coming in? And what are the other components that are coming in as far as what's the regular sidewalk going to look like? What are the crosswalks going to look like? Where are we going to put the little parks that we put in there? Let's try to add a little park feature down by the south end of the project there. We spent a fair amount of time working on that, and a lot of those items are incorporated into the pattern book also, and that's the updated one that we gave you. We spent a fair amount of time making sure that the cross-access would align in the different commercial areas. We spent a real amount of time up front saying, how does that piece look on M45? Because that was one of the target areas that we wanted to identify and talk with you guys about tonight. We knew it was a concern of yours. So we spent some time, we made sure that those cross-access points were easy, pretty definable, you could see them right away, and then also gave the access to the different lots, because the access on the north side off M45 is limited to one access point. The access points off the crossroad that connects the Goodwill Industries site and the Ferndale site access points, there would be more of them there. So how does that interact? And we tried to put that together in the model. We took the roadway, this is a pretty big deal, working with Scott and Frank and the team. We came back and we took the roadway down to 66 feet for the right-of-way, but we added that center lane that you could do the turnouts. The rationale there was, and it's pretty much summarized in Scott's report, but we still wanted the traffic to be able to go through and get access to the driveways. But at the same time, you didn't want this huge wide open area that people wanted to go through quick. So that was a little bit of the discussion, or this came out of the discussion where we were saying, all right, is this a bypass, more of a thoroughfare? Are we trying to create a community on this and slow things down? And so working with Scott and the city team, we came up with a 66-foot with a turn lane in the middle. We spent a fair amount of time making sure we defined what that walkability for the site is, where they connect, where they go through, how people get from the future homes in the back to the apartments, from the apartments up to the commercial businesses, where east-west, and then how they get to the Laker line. We spent some time doing that, putting it in the pattern book, putting in the plan, and then also incorporating that into the model. And when I say that, we tried to be consistent with the model and the plan and the pattern book. So there's 3 different documents you're working on. They're all pretty in-depth, but we try to create that consistency with them so that what you saw in the pattern book is pretty similar to what you're seeing on the model, which is similar to what we're looking at on the layout in the PASP version 2. We added bike sharing spot. We added pocket parks. We added that little wetland overlook trail on the south side. I already said we defined what the 6 acres is going to be. And then, we wanted to make sure that we had the progression of housing types. That we started with, okay, we got the medium density residential, where's that? We defined this either, duplex condos or single family residential on the south, and how that interacts with the commercial up top. That's sort of my summary of what we did from V1 to V2. Any questions?
Commissioners, any questions at this point?
Yeah.
How does this fit with the master plan?
Well, I've sort of got that in my summary, but I have a summary at the end that I could tell you. I think what we've done is, from a master plan standpoint, we took something, and we took something that was, we didn't take it literally, I think is to be real blunt. I think from a literal standpoint, where it was set up, the site wasn't set up for it.
The site wasn't set up for multifamily residential?
No, the site wasn't set up for the progression and the picture that was there.
The site is set up for multi-residential.
So I
48
think we've
units
got
per
those 3
unit.
components.
48 units per acre, right?
What are we at, 6 point?
Where on the master plan does it go for commercial?
It's what we had in version 1.
I'm just saying, I didn't agree with version 1, and my biggest complaint was that it doesn't follow the master plan. We worked on this specifically saying we did not want to develop behind Meyer there into another commercial jumble.
So
This layout you have is West Town mirrored. That's what it is. It's West Town just flipped over behind Myers. And my biggest problem, and this is to the Planning Commission, my biggest problem is it doesn't even get anywhere near what we worked on for months in the master plan. We viewed that more as houses and apartments back there. something that, where people could walk to Meyer and everything. No commercial was ever listed on there. Now, if you want commercial along the M45 corridor, I might bend to that, but you're going all the way back on Meyer on the east side of the land there. No place in the whole discussion on this area did, and Frank was all involved in it, no place did we talk about this being what we wanted in that area. Trying to develop more into a housing and neighbors and residential. So I'm having a real issue personally getting past this this layout. I don't mind the apartments. I'll be honest there, but I'd look for something a lot different than what's being laid out there. And you're gonna have a hard time convincing me of that. I'm sorry, I was just part of the master planning process, and we talked specifically about this area. It wasn't a brush over, it wasn't just going by or anything. It was in-depth, detailed talking about it, discussing where the city wanted to go with things. And I certainly believe in private property use, you know, in private property rights, but after I saw what happened to Westtown and what it turned into, I can't see this. You have to convince me. And I
So
don't
I
know how
think,
you're gonna do
Tyler, I
that.
think the challenge that we tried to address is it's hard to have residential up against the backside of
No,
the
it's
Myers.
not. Go over to
In a
Napa
place.
Corner Meyer, go over to Alpine Meyer, go over to Home Depot. There's residential up against all of them.
And we're trying to incorporate that into this. You know, this is also part of a bigger vision where we start at the north. You know, if you look at the master plan where it's referencing, it's talking about bringing that residential down to O'Brien. O'Brien's a mile down the road.
Yep.
And so we're looking at that transition. We're starting that transition here, where we're starting with a commercial up against M45. You know, I think our density and our usage requirements will be different up against the backside of Meyer, where you're looking at probably dentist offices, professional offices, type stuff like that. And it is commercial, but you know, it's hard to put housing in a density of 6.8 per unit acre up against the backside of
I'm
Myers.
just
with
saying,
people-
it does not match with what we went into, spent a lot of money doing.
From a literal standpoint, it doesn't match. From an intent standpoint.
I'm sorry,
I
you're
can't say
wrong.
we are
It does
implicit.
not literally match what we had in the master plan.
Yeah.
I can show you the master plan. Nowhere in there was commercial. So quit saying it literally matches. It does not
No, I'm saying it
match.
doesn't literally match.
Well, okay, it does not match. I'm sorry. But it gets to the point that what are we gonna do with the city? We talked about the development in Walker and how to control it. And I don't think this is following what we talked about, so I'll shut up now.
I think the other point that I just like to bring up though, is that first piece behind Meyer is already zoned C4 and C2. So I recognize that the plan wasn't, and the master plan has in there, but the current zoning is C4 right behind Meyer, all the way back behind Blaine's, and C2 up on the corner across from Fifth Third. So I think there's a blend there of trying to bring all the amenities of public streets, these nice facilities, that, you know, there's a lot of money spent on that, and trying to get, you know, I don't want to live right behind a Meyer, especially in a single-family residential home. I don't think it's practical. But that's my answer.
Any other questions, comments at this point? In terms of the traffic, do you have a representative that would speak to that, or?
I've got some talking points that I can,
Okay.
can sort of work through with you if you'd like.
Okay.
I think for the traffic discussion, we've worked off of Scott's report. It was the second item on the list, engineering staff report. Let me quick run there myself. So updated the traffic study. We got both to the city and MDOT the reports and the layouts that they were asking for. One good news is we got an agreement, we have a signed amendment with the easement for the Goodwill Industries site that if needed, we can dedicate that to the city with the full public road requirements. We'd make the improvements and all that, but we've got the agreement there on that easement that will then get dedicated to the city if needed as part of this development. You know, part of the layout that we've got, we've added the tapers off of M45 that we've worked on to try to reduce traffic. We've added a right turn service lane. It's about 900 feet. We've got the whole, pardon me?
Okay, the right turn service lane?
So the right turn, that it basically connects from the Ottawa County line. We've either got a taper or we've got a right service lane all the way to the Ferndale entrance.
All right.
Those improvements there were made. There was an initial taper that started west of Ferndale. We brought it all the way across over in front of Goodwill, and I think it starts by the cemetery to get that decel lane and then a full right turn lane, whether you're going into Goodwill or whether you're going into the LaSalle entrance or whether you're going into the Ferndale entrance.
So that's a contrast to the initial plan that you'd submitted, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We've got the development, we've got the layout for all the internal public road system. That's about 3,300 feet. I just mentioned we got the Goodwill Industries entrance to be able to be dedicated. We also took the easement that we've got and the access that we've got on the Ferndale entrance, and we widened it to the west. It was 20 feet on both sides that we were able to work with on the right-of-way. We added another 23 feet, and that was to accommodate an additional turn lane coming in, and then to widen the right-of-way on our side of the property, so that we could accommodate future, whether it was, some of Scott's concerns about, where you're going to put the signs, where you're going to put the snow, that type of stuff. We worked with our traffic consultant with MDOT and Scott worked together on how do we meet the traffic study requirements. I think that's summarized in Scott's report. He needed some additional he needs some additional detail on the sequencing, what was going to go where, what timing was going to change. And I think at the end, I think in the report where it says basically that although we're going to see a little increase in traffic, they've accepted the potential mitigation, understanding that reasonable development needs to be completed. I understand we still have one open item, and that's the left turn stacking on the northbound exit for Ferndale. I think, and I believe, and I guess Scott, you can probably speak this a little better, is that request is at MDOT, and they're trying to see if they can do a little additional timing change on the lights. If that's needed and necessary, and we got to add a left turn light to that signal, we can do that.
Now and I tried to get at this before the meeting tonight, and I couldn't locate my copy of the first plan. Is that something you have available that we could throw up on the screen? Because
I'll go back to our agenda for July 21st.
okay, all right.
Overheads are like black and white now. I don't know what happened. It used to be a color camera, and now it's like gray and black and white. I don't know what happened. So it's like 1988. No, I mean, hey, that's when we were all.
This is a big difference than this.
Is it the 24th of those then?
July 20.
July 20th? That's. Thank you.
Oh, that's the master plan. Okay, yeah, I had that.
commercial areas, the outlots along M45, outlots behind Meyer, behind Blaine's. And this is the multifamily. And there were comments at the work session about, is there any way to make this become more of a development that centers around the water bodies? Other than that, I'll let folks talk.
And is there also in that packet, the excerpt from the 2020 master plan?
I can tell you that Paul and I were just looking at that. I don't know if, I'm not sure if your former planning director included the master plan stuff in that.
It's okay. That's what I pulled out.
Zoning and general location. There we go, look at that. I'm not sure how she had these organized, so bear with me for a second. So you have two layers in your master plan. You have what's called future land use, and then you have community character. So the future land use for this area, here's the properties that we're talking about tonight, and this is Meyer and Blaine's. So the frontage was laid out, and wrapping around behind Meyer was laid out as mixed use. And then the remainder of the site was a residential 4 to 8 units per acre. So that's future land use. And then it references your community character map, which is here, which shows here's Meyer and Blaine's in red. And then the area along M45 and wrapping behind Meyer is called neighborhood corridor, I believe. And there's a list of zoning districts that go along with that. And then the remainder of the site was 4 to 8 units per acre residential. So there was, here's where I think you guys are getting hung up on. The neighborhood corridor description, and we're back in Stanleyville here, so here's Meyer and here's Blaine's, shows the frontage and the wraparound behind Meyer as neighborhood corridor. And then what we tried to do when we built this thing together to guide future zoning decisions would be the appropriate zoning districts for neighborhood corridor throughout the city would be ORP office, the ARM districts for multifamily, mixed use PUD, which does include a commercial component, but in a mixed use pattern, and built environment. Public, semi-public for parks, if anything went in there, RPUD 2, high density residential, which is being requested. And then there was consideration of creating a new mixed use district, which we haven't undertaken yet, because this plan is pretty new. So hopefully that'll frame it up a little bit for you as far as what's in the master plan. And what I will say for the master plan, and I'm trying to be consistent with the way that we applied that plan on multiple properties. English Hills, the former golf course, which has been rezoned and will be under construction soon, also had one of those highly aspirational plans. Remember, there was a guy named Mike Campbell who was a landscape architect who was kind of off to the side, and he was just drawing the whole time. And those plans landed in the master plan more. I certainly would not take those literally, okay? We certainly did not when English Hills came in. If you go back and look at that plan up there, it was very much a, the year 2100 kind of concept. As things grow and redevelop, so I would advise the planning commission to not get too hung up on that drawing for this site. Because again, like I tried to put in my staff report, just hint at it, these plans are made for communities to grow into. So in 2040, as urbanization happens and then redevelops, maybe some components of that drawing become more realistic. I don't know if they are right now. I would fall back to, what do you have in your plan for future land use and neighborhood corridor? And then it comes down to,
Thank you. Well, I guess that gives a little perspective on the master plan, although I was wondering if you go down to, oh, okay, you're off from it. Whether there's, in the end or before that, a representation of the 2020 master plan site constraints. That's something that I think Progressive put together in their initial plan submittal.
That was the work session? Progressive, is that from the private side?
It was,
Is this the document you're referring to?
yeah, yes.
This is it, Frank?
We can put that on the screen, it's gonna be in fuzzy black and white, so. We used to have a color count somewhere along the line. Okay, well, you guys feel free to come on up here and talk to this. I'll try to- How long this is gonna come out, so bear with me.
Yeah, really.
It's awesome. World War II pictures. Yes. All right, so that in the camera. Zoom in. We lost it, Claire. Terry, your system is overloading right now. Smoke is coming out of its ears.
Okay.
Trying to reboot it and see if we can get back control. So I would say go forward and I'll do the best I can to get these projected.
Okay. Well, one of the things, looking at that in particular, I thought it did a good job of identifying the constraints on the site in terms of wetlands, sensitive areas, and it was overlaid on what the master plan was for the site. And it portrays the commercial along the frontage, I believe. Mixed use, I think, is how it was categorized. So that kind of aligns with lots 1 through 6, I believe, or 1 through 5. And then as you go, then we've got the service drive, or the parallel drive south of Lake Michigan Drive, and then go south of that again, and then that gets into a combination, I think, of residential and maybe some commercial in there as well. So I think that the plan that's been resubmitted for review, I think does a very good job of identifying those constraints in terms of the natural features. And the bioswale looks like it pretty much coincides with the location of the detention ponds, at least the northern one, and to some extent the southern one on the site. But I think in terms of the points that Tyler was raising initially in the conversation, as far as does the resubmitted plan match the master plan, I think that's where this graphic at least showed south of that parallel drive, the one that parallels Lake Michigan Drive, is predominantly, if not exclusively, well, it's predominantly residential, and that's a contrast I think that perhaps you were speaking of, Tyler.
So the two documents I did give to Frank there were those copies where it was the red was the area that was the constraints.
Yep.
And it was overlaid on top of the original master plan that was included in the picture or the literal version, along with the second page is that same constraints document that you're referring to, that has our development on top of it.
Yeah.
It's gonna be really hard to see with the black and white, but I don't know, Frank, if maybe you wanna pass them around. Those are two copies, and they're from the previous the previous meeting that we had.
Yep.
This one has
Yep.
the overlay of it.
And initially, I guess the reason I wanted to look at the contrast of the two, so your initial plan as far as the layout of the internal circulation system for the vehicles looks to be pretty consistent with it.
We tried to keep it consistent with the previous plan, with the exception of we did some of the changes that Scott had recommended. And then we put a lot more definition into where the access points are gonna be, what type of access points they are, and then made sure we had cross easements and cross accessibility between the sites.
Okay, all right. So you kind of summarized your comments with regard to the traffic.
From the traffic component, I think our positives are, and that doesn't, I've got some different, since we're discussing the Ferndale entrance on its own discussion point, I haven't brought up those particular pieces.
Okay.
But, effectively, we've got 2 public road access points. The one for Goodwill Industries that we've now secured, and that's a pretty big win. Getting Goodwill to say they'll dedicate the road and the easement, and for us to make those improvements, so that the city has that private, or that public road infrastructure. We have the standout crossings connection. So those are 2 public roads connection points that we have. When we discuss the Ferndale, we can talk a little bit more there, but we've got, with our access, we've got full access. We've got the ability to make all the traffic changes we need to make the improvements we make on the Ferndale access. We just can't make Meyer give you the land.
Okay, all right.
We're willing to dedicate the land. I'm getting a little bit into that discussion. We're willing to dedicate the land. We're willing to make the improvements we need to make. I think we've made the changes to make sure it's there. And we've got a couple solutions that we think may be able to make that still attainable, to have that public road connectivity for the future, even if we can't work the current situation out. But it also puts in the private or the public road network that we've talked about, and we've talked about for the last 7 years. When 3 years before we came in with Westtown, was the connectivity to bring it back out, a public road to connect back to Wilson, south of the Consumers Power line, and then also connect down to O'Brien with a public road, which then gives you the connectivity to the signal on Wilson. And this is sort of the first step to be able to do that. And, we think that's a pretty big win.
All right. Scott, maybe this would be a point to have you kind of address the traffic issues that are laid out in your memo.
Are you guys done, Todd? Or do you have more to do?
From purely the traffic standpoint, I don't know, we've got some other ones when it comes to the Ferndale piece, because that's a different sort of traffic, but it's a different connecting point.
Well, I don't want to jump in front of anybody in line here, but if you want me to go, I'll go.
Yeah, if you could, please.
Okay. I'm just going to speak right to the report that we put together. This is not a comprehensive, complete PASP report. As Frank mentioned, we really focused in on 3 critical things to kind of just get the ball rolling again. I don't think we were looking at this saying, this is our end-all report for the PASP. So we also did add our report from July 13th, and that's in our packet, which was quite large. I apologize for that, but I think it's all important stuff. And you'll see in that last report, too, it varied a little bit from our traditional reporting where we give you bullet points that you can kind of look through. It was more of a narrative, and I think still valuable for you to look at. So relative to the 3 issues, the developer did update their traffic study from the last time that they were in. I think the changes were pretty minor because the land use changes were pretty minor. There were a few commercial uses that were adjusted, and they adjusted the traffic generation accordingly. But I think the results from that last study are still pretty much the results from this study. And when you look at that, there was quite a bit of talk about the configuration of Ferndale and M45 and how that's going to work out. And we did have concerns about that. Brandon Simon, the site engineer, shortly before we wrote this report, was able to put together a geometric layout that did look like it would work. I worked through that with MDOT. It had a small offset between the south leg of Ferndale and the existing north leg of Ferndale. But we felt like because it's a 5-lane road, it's a big intersection, we felt like that offset was something that we could live with. So the layout seemed to work, and we were okay with that. The bigger issue there, I think, is how is that going to be put into the existing easements that are there, because there is not existing public right-of-way there. And so the issue becomes the property owner working with the developer to secure that. And I think if you step back in time to when Standale Crossings was put in, they bought the property from the same property owner, and there just might not have been the correct assumptions made about future connections and sharing the signal and things like that. So in that case, I think Myers got a little bit of power in terms of holding back, and we've tried to help facilitate discussions, but that's really a developer thing to work through, so keep that in mind. And if that can be worked out, this is also a very unique spot where the property line that is owned by the Goodale family goes right on top of the curb on the east side. So when you think about other things that need to go into a road, like signs, like snow storage, the ability to maintain that stuff, we're going to need a little bit of a right-of-way easement from Fifth Third Bank as well. And I think things are spaced accordingly there. The sidewalk's in the right spot, the building's in the right spot. It's just a matter of having that strip of grass behind the sidewalk, behind the curb, I'm sorry, so that we can treat that as a public road if and when this comes together. So keep those things in mind. Inside the traffic study, there's some charts and graphs that I had pointed out I think are probably good for you folks to look at. They provide what's called an LOS, a level of service, for the various movements that take place in those intersections. So you can look and see where an intersection might be at a C or D grade, which is similar to a grade you might get in school. And then you can watch that change with future build out, with background traffic growth, and you can see how that'll impact the intersections that are part of the study, which is primarily M45 and M11, but then you also have to take a look at some of the other signals, which are Standale, the Westtown Drive, and also the Ferndale driveway, which has been a big point of contention. So you can look right in there and see what some of the problems are. And I think one of the ones that we focused in on and being concerned about is Ferndale and their people's ability to turn left out of there during the peak hour. And if you look at that chart, I think it might have even been circled in the copy that I put in my packet. It shows quite a delay after build out. Right now the delay is about 60 seconds to turn left there in the peak hour, which is pretty significant. That's a letter grade of an E. It's a concern, but it goes up into the hundreds with the build out. And the only way to minimize that is to build a left turn lane and take green time away from M45, which is a big no-no for the state, because everybody that calls in and complains about M45 and M11, they pick which route they're on and they say it doesn't have enough green time, I wait too long here. So we get about equal amount of calls from people on Wilson and people on Lake Michigan Drive saying, you need to give us more green time. And so you can see the conundrum there. There's no green time to give. So right now, MDOT is looking at the potential of a left turn signal being added to that. But even if it's added, there's not a lot of opposing traffic coming through. It's strictly green time that they need to be able to get out of that leg and just get out of the intersection. So that's something that we're looking at. If MDOT can find a way to propose that or to execute that, then we would probably come back during the FASP if this moves forward. And we would make that a condition that the turn signal be put in at that time.
Well, one of the things that's consistent with this design as it was with the first one that was submitted is the distance to the south, so to speak, off from M45, that this area where the turning's taking place it's limited. It doesn't continue down. It gets down to a point and reaches a T intersection. And that, I believe, would put a limit on just how much room there was to even stack the vehicles that want to take a left-hand turn out of that driveway then.
Right. And that's a good example of how this isn't a full comprehensive report, because there's a whole bunch of details like that we have to get into before something like this can be put together and construction plans can be drawn. Because if you look at that, there's not a lot of distance there. And if you look around at other Meijer complexes and other shopping centers, when you have those intersections like that with a very short distance before you get to if you call it a ring road that goes around the shopping center, they back up. And they get a little bit dangerous as people point at each other, who's got the stop sign and who doesn't. Sometimes it's not as intuitive as you might think. So some thought needs to go into that.
Okay.
All right, want me to keep going? The public road network, Todd mentioned, originally their plan showed an 86-foot wide right-of-way, which is our commercial industrial standard. That gives 3 12-foot lanes. And in a place like this, that center lane is very, very important. We did agree, after talking with the mayor and the planning department, that we could probably live with a 66-foot right-of-way that allowed for 3 11-foot lanes, because we're not expecting a lot of trucks here. There will be some. It's inevitable. But we're not expecting a lot of that. I think for the developer, this means they get to retain extra property. They don't have to provide as much right-of-way and parkway. The DPW is not super happy about that, but it's hard to take anything away from them and have it be a positive. But I think they've said, we think we can live with that. So that's something that we've agreed to at staff level. It doesn't mean that you have to agree to it as a planning commission, but might be worthy of some discussion. I think the key there with the center turn lane, maybe I should add to that, is that there could be as many as 20 driveways inside this development, because all of the access is interior, or most of the access is interior. And we want to make sure that if somebody's exiting lot 2 the same time somebody's pulling into lot 3, you don't have a lot of left turn lockups and those kinds of things. The best way we can minimize that is to really watch the location of the driveways as the FASPs come in, and to make sure that there's a center turn lane that can handle it. But there's going to be friction. There's going to be a lot going on there. We just want to be honest about that and point that out. So we can't overstate the importance of that interior network. And then I think lastly, as it relates to the public road network, internal discussions at staff level, I think the direction to us is that should be public. It has to be public. And I think if you looked and said, well, we can make everything public except the Ferndale thing, it really doesn't work without the Ferndale. That traffic signal is critical to the success here. And we got to find a solution for that and make that work. Lastly, the commercial layout, I tried to stay away from that for the most part, but I think it's important to point out the requirement for cross access between all those lots. And I can envision a scenario where maybe lots 2 and 3 don't come in for development as quickly as lots 1 and 4. So it's going to be up to the developer to make sure that those designs will still facilitate east-west cross access among all those lots. We want to make sure that that's clearly stated, so when a developer does come in and say, I don't want to do that, they have to do that. It's a critical part of the success. So that's a high-level summary. There's a whole lot of detail in between those comments, and I can certainly help answer questions.
Thanks, Scott.
That was a very good summary for a complicated problem. Thank you. I was impressed with that.
A couple comments. I think Scott, and I think he just misspoke, and because I know the eastern side of the Ferndale right-of-way is not owned by the Goodale family. That piece is, we stop in the middle of that intersection. On the road, you'll see it. On the diagrams, you'll see it. The right 20 feet of the right-of-way is owned by Myron, and then the property line for Fifth Third goes up against the side there.
Yeah,
now, if you look at the diagram, is that right, Scott?
Yeah, that's in a cross-access easement too.
Correct. It's the cross-access. It's a multi-commercial cross-access agreement that we both get to use.
So the east side of it is,
The land is owned by Meyer.
okay, Scott, you were going right and left. I wanted to go.
I'm sorry, the east side is owned by Meyer.
Okay.
The west side of the right-of-way is owned by us. We both get full access to it and unlimited use on it so that we can develop the property.
But I
That's
think
why
to
it's
clarify
split.
my statement, to make sure that was clear, I'm assuming that becomes right-of-way. So that right-of-way would then go up to the east end of the Meyer property, which is on top of the curb between them and Fifth Third.
And then even where if you look, there is a little room for signage even between the Fifth Third property line and the right-of-way. There's like 3 feet, a third of the way back. There's 2 feet on the further way back. If we had any specific requirements there, we could address them. We had talked earlier, I had mentioned about the left turn lane, the sequencing, and if we have to add a light to that, we can accommodate that. Okay, great. Yeah, it's in C700 if you're interested, but it does give the dimensions that are off the curb. But we don't own that land, but we have full access to it. We have full rights to use it. We have full rights to improve it. As Meyer did on our property. You gotta remember, we own the west side of that whole entrance, we own that. So Meyer's right to improve that is just like our right to improve the eastern side of the right-of-way. And then to accommodate the traffic, we've extended that right-of-way. So it was a 40-foot right-of-way. It was 20 foot on Meyer's property, 20 foot on our property. So when standout crossings came in, there was 48 feet for right-of-way that this easement addressed that either party could use. What we've done is to accommodate the traffic, and the study that came back and working with Scott and his team, is we added an additional 23 feet to the west. So right now, that right-of-way that we are willing to dedicate to the city isn't the 20 feet that is currently there. We're willing to dedicate the 43 feet indicated on the prints to accommodate the additional traffic. And that's because we moved, we added a lane, we brought a wider lane turning in, and that's in the traffic study, and that's in that diagram that's on C700 in the plan.
Okay,
One more point,
Yep.
Terry, if you would. The cross access. So, a second point that we have to discuss is sort of like that commercial piece that's up on M45. At that point, we can talk about the modeling and where the buildings are, and then the cross access and how we've laid that up there. And then I guess the last point, we're going to mix it a little bit when we talk about, traffic affects all of these. But we'll talk a little bit more when we specifically talk about the Ferndale entrance. Are there any other questions of me relating to the traffic or anything that Scott had? Scott, is there anything that I wasn't clear on for you?
I jumped in, so I just shut up. Maybe I should ask if the commission has any questions of me.
commissioners, any questions for Scott on this?
What happens if they don't secure the Meyer, let's say, part of the?
I think the planning commission has a very tough decision to make, because it seems like it's a very critical part of this. We don't go through all the details, all the discussions we've had, but we've talked about, could that signal be moved? Could another signal be added? There is really no other solution. Although it's not great, this is the best solution at hand here. As long as that can be, turned into a safe public intersection.
And part of, I don't know if you described it in the detail I understand, but the review that you've done with this has been concert with MDOT, conferring with them all the way through this process to, as you mentioned, there's allowance for an adjustment 6 foot or so to the west for that alignment in order to try to make that work through there.
Yes, I think, early on, we even had a private consultant that was helping us, but that consultant's firm, Progressive, actually started working on the project, so we kind of backed off from that, but we've been collaborating with MDOT throughout this whole process. Every memo that we write is joint, and they sign off on it as well. And, you can see that we try to do that with most projects, because it really serves the public better if we can both come together and agree, and it helps with the compromises. But they've been every step of the way.
Okay. Now, did you want to talk about Ferndale in
Yeah, I think
particular at
that's,
this point?
I think Jason's question on that is a good point, or a break in to talk about Ferndale. So we have every legal right to make these improvements that are required for the Ferndale entrance. We can widen the road. We can put the signage where it needs to be as long as it's in the right of way. We can run the traffic through it. We are more than willing to dedicate or give the city the public right of way for the piece we own. We just cannot force Meyer to give the city land. The city has every right to go over that. Our traffic has every right to go over it. We'll dedicate the land to you. We will assign our easement to you, which then gives you all the rights, the same rights that we have with the Meyer entrance. Meyer has to go. I just can't force Meyer to give you land. Now, Meyer's got 2 more outlots. I'm guessing if it's a piece of land you really want dedicated to the city for a public road, you can require that next time they come in for an outlot approval. Similar to what you did with Blaine's when you got the standout crossings. But we have every legal right to maintain it, to go across it, to improve it, just like Meyer did when they put it in. They were going across our property when they put this road in. That intersection, that signal is half on us. We've just expanded it to accommodate the traffic requirements for the development in accordance with what Scott and MDOT have recommended. I believe it's been pretty much accepted, other than the left turn signal thing that we're willing to work out.
Well, that left turn signal thing to me is critical, whether it's public or private. Is that to have sufficient stacking.
Yep.
As I understand it, for the left turns that are in question here, it's one thing to work it out to get the time to get those emptied out, but in the meantime, as they stack up, is it sufficient? It'll come to a point where it's either going to stack up onto this Meyer property that's south again, or it curls to the west, and that doesn't seem to be addressed in terms of the plan that you have in hand right now that you've provided.
So that's something that honestly we just found out when Frank was working on his report. I think that's something that Scott's been working with MDOT. So we weren't aware that was an issue at the time.
But if that's the case where the trade-off is to trade off green time on M45, it sounds like there's only a certain point that can work, and it's going to break down over time, at least the way I understand it, in terms of as you go deeper into the projections of traffic in that area.
And Terry, maybe that's a good time for me to jump back in and help out with that. We wrote in our report that we accepted what they were proposing. We didn't approve it or anything like that. We're just saying we accept your report. MDOT still has some concerns, but if they can limit some of those changes to a second here and there, they're absolutely going to listen, and they're going to try to make this all work. But as far as the stacking goes, that's not something that we're working on with MDOT. That's currently on private property and part of a PASP, and it might be good to ask the traffic engineer that wrote the report, Leah, who's here, what she's got in terms of the stacking, because it is a critical thing, and we've pointed out that that could be the nexus of a whole lot of trouble right there, that little intersection, and it certainly wouldn't hurt to have some more information about how they think that's going to perform.
So Lee doesn't have all those individual numbers with her.
Okay.
Wasn't aware that we were going to be talking about those. But it's also something that I'm sure she and Scott can work with, and if that's a condition that we talk about, and it can be something that can be resolved before FASP.
Yeah, I think going forward that's a detail that will need to be addressed in some fashion. Turning to Cliff Bloom, the city attorney, the discussion about Ferndale, whether it's public or private. Do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, I'll try to speak loud because I don't have a mic per se, so let me know if you can't hear me. There's been a lot of discussion, obviously, on Ferndale and the fact that the eastern half of it is not within the control of the developer. the overall easement, the existing 40 feet is private on both sides. I've had some discussions with the developer's attorney, and we agree in general, I think, with the city engineer that this has got to be public. How you would work this as a private, it's essentially a private road, a private service drive, and so on. And assuming, from everything I've heard the city engineer write and say, you can't move this over, obviously, to the west, the city would be piggybacking on a private agreement. It would be nice if we could be certain that the developer could even assign their half to the city. I'm not convinced that they can. So the city would not have direct control over this. Everything that happens, the city would have to go through the developer and the developer's successor. We have concerns about liability. I mean, if this looks like a public road, it acts like a public road, but it's not a public road, and someone gets hurt on it, the city's in the unenviable position of potentially having liability but no control. And, you know, what happens if this doesn't get snowplowed by a private group? What happens if it doesn't get maintained? You're constantly going to be being piggybacked onto a private organization. The developer eventually is going to be out of this, so I assume there's going to be some community association that potentially would be responsible for this. So again, it's a third party. I don't know, I would be interested, and this is a question I have not asked the developer's attorney yet, is there any precedence for this anywhere? I don't know that there is. I mean, generally we're dealing with private service drives that are internal in a development, but to have a road like this that the public perceives as being public or owned by the city and not is problematic. So our office believes that it's got to be public.
Okay. Any questions for Cliff at this point?
Yeah. So Chris, our attorney, who's been working with Cliff, he probably has a couple things he can say right now.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Chris Meyer. I'm here on behalf of the developer, JAG Company. So when we first met with the city, we had planned this to all be private access, the way it is on West Town East. So if you're on West Town East, same sort of setup where you've got commercial and an L, Aldi going all the way up to Starbucks, and then you have multifamily in the middle. And those are knit together with what are called reciprocal easement agreements. And so everybody who buys in that development, so the owner of the multifamily and Chick-fil-A and Culver's and all that, they all pay into a pool in which they maintain those roads. They vote for a board to maintain those roads. They have a budget for snow plowing those roads. And in addition, in that particular development, it's also for the stormwater drainage basin that separates the two. That's the traditional way of doing these sorts of developments. So that's what we proposed here. We have full, like we have at West Town East, I'll call it West Town East for lack of a better word, we have full legal control over all of these easements and have unlimited ability to do our development where we are putting it. So as you might recall, there's an easement at West Town East that goes out to Cummings. So that's an example there of another easement going out to a different road. And so we came in with that proposal, and the city has changed its policy since 2018 and said, we want this to be public. And we said, okay. So we are dedicating the public, the interior roads to the public as you know. And we worked with the city to work back and forth on the width of those, how they would be pedestrianized. We came in with one plan and they said that's going to be too much of a cut through. So we want to soften that down. So I think we've reached a resolution on that. Then they said, well, we'd really like to have Goodwill Industries and Ferndale Drive be public. Goodwill Industries has agreed for it to be public. That's great. So now you have a public road that's coming off of MEM 45 at Goodwill Industries, coming in, going east-west, all the way to the Meyer boundary, and then also going all the way down to Standdale Crossings. And then it actually continues to a cul-de-sac, because the intention is to do a development coming up from O'Brien that will then just meet meet there. If you want to put up the plan for Ferndale, the detail plan, I'm going to show you something on that. It's the separate, it's called Ferndale PASP M45 Site Entrance Plan.
It's number 18. 18 on there, Frank.
No, it's on this one. Yeah. Yeah, it's of your tabs, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, ninth one down.
You're on the July website, I think, for back to. This is 12/7. Still on July, all right, we'll go to 27. So you said 8th, 9th?
It's the highlighted one now.
Yeah, it says, Ferndale, Vista PASP, Ferndale, N45 Site Entrance Plan, 12/7/20. Yeah. Okay, so if you go up on that, and I don't know how closely you can see that on your screens, but I'm gonna stand here and describe it. So can you go in a little bit more so people can see the numbers on there? I don't know if you can or not. But as you can see, the dotted line to the right of the curve, so to the east of the curve, is actually the Meyer Fifth Third boundary line, yes. And so you can see that to the west of it, we have some space there for signage if you wanted to put any additional signage. You can see that in some places that's 3.28 feet wide, another place it's 2.91 feet wide. It narrows up at the right turn. The east 20 feet of that is owned by Meyer, but we have an easement over it, just like they have an easement over the west 20 feet. And so you can see that we are expanding it out an additional 23 feet to the west. So you're going to have 43 feet of right-of-way to the west. You can see that there's any room that we're adding to the west, there's space there for that new asphalt to be plowed and have snow go to the west. I know that was one issue that was raised, and as you can see, we're not going to be adding any lanes on the east that would need to be plowed into that more narrow 3-foot wide Fifth Third Park, or Meyer Fifth Third Parkway. And then if you want to go down to the Meyer Gooddale cross access easement agreement. I don't know, I want to stop there. Do you have, anybody have any questions on that? On those dimensions and how you saw those lanes laid out?
That easement, as it specifies for ingress and egress only,
And utilities.
and utilities?
Yep, and it's for full commercial development. It specifically says neither party can claim that the other party's overburdening it. The whole point of this easement, done 20 years ago when Meyer was developed, and then a similar companion easement was done in 2009 when Goodwill Industries was developed, was to allow all three of these developments to come in together and have what I'll call a little grin of an access road coming in at Goodwill Industries and then going across our property and then coming out on Ferndale.
Does it allow for snow storage?
Well, it requires maintenance, but you're talking about, well, there's no portion that's on Fifth Third. I think that's the confusing part.
No, I'm talking about within the Meyer easement. Is that just for ingress or egress, or could it accept snow storage as well?
Not snow storage from our property, but we're not putting any snow storage on it. That's the point I wanted to make. I think that was some confusion that somehow we were going to be taking snow from our property and putting it on the east side of the easement. We're not. The east side of the easement's already fully built out and plowed. We're adding more asphalt to the west side of the easement, and that's where the snow will be plowed.
Okay,
I know that you wanted some signs on the east side of the easement, and that's why I'm pointing out there's a 3-foot wide parkway there for signs to go. Frank, do you want to pull up the easement? Yeah, so it's the one that says Meyer Goodyear Cross Access Easement. So if you scroll down, so there you go, stop. So it said, as you can see there, this grant of easement, and you can see here, Goodwill and Gooddale. It's kind of confusing, there's a lot of goods here. So you're going Goodwill Industries on the west, then Gooddale in the middle, and then Goodwill, which is Myers Real Estate arm on the east. Gooddale and Goodwill specifically acknowledge that each party intends to use the Gooddale and Goodwill easement areas, so that's the easement areas on each person's property, for shared drives serving commercial and other development on their respective properties. And each agrees such use does not, will not constitute an overburdening of the easements granted herein, or interfere with that party's use of the easement areas, irrespective of the amount of traffic generated by the businesses conducted upon the Goodwill property and Gooddale's retained property, which utilize the shared drives. So our point is, we have full private rights to do this. This is what was developed, these easements were developed and presumably approved by the city back in 2004 when they approved the Meyer development. There's a similar easement on the west side with Goodwill Industries from 2009. Adding the public overlay of saying, okay, this is the fee interest and this is now dedicated to the public, doesn't expand from a planning perspective anything that's relevant to our development. We have the full right to do everything there. We have the full right to maintain it if we have to. I don't think that Meyer will not maintain it well. We have to pay them half of the cost of maintenance, as you might imagine. But if not, we can maintain it. So we've done this. I mean, the precedent, the question was asked, what's the precedent? Well, the precedent is Westtown East. It's fully private. It works just fine. All those owners there are responsible for maintaining those roads all the way up to M45 and to Wilson, and then also out to Cummings. We could do the same thing here. That was our original plan, to do the same thing here. Works just fine. But we can dedicate what we can to the public. If that's what the city wants, we're willing to do that. But as Todd said, we can't force Meyer to dedicate its 20 feet to the public. Okay. But we do have full right to use that. There's no limit on it. Meyer can't say that, oh, you can't use this for your development. The whole point, like I said there, is that both parties get to use that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
As well, Cliff. All right, we've had some conversations about the drive access, Ferndale. They've given us an update on the pattern book, which from my standpoint, that's very well done and seems to be responsive to the concerns that we had expressed previously about the detail within the development, the change in the layout for the multifamily. I think it still could use some tweaks, but I think it's a much better plan, at least from my standpoint on it. So, I don't know, comments from others on the board as far as what your impressions are right now? Joe, we'll start with you.
You're putting me on the spot, and I'm not an engineer or anything, but talked a little bit about not quite following the master plan. I can see where nothing's going to be perfect. It was just a good idea what things might have to be later on, so I could see it where it doesn't quite agree with the master plan, but I could still go along with it on that part. What else do you want me to say about?
Well, we talked about access, circulation not only for cars, but also for pedestrians within there.
Yeah, I thought that the new plan that with the housing and stuff was better, yes. Yes, I thought that was quite a bit better. It didn't look so symmetrical and everything, yes.
Okay. All right, Mark?
Not much to add there. I struggle with the master plan and those commercial lots. I guess as Tyler brought them up. Just not sure what to think about that at this point. So.
Okay, thank you. Tyler?
I said my piece about the master plan. I think they did a really good job on the road, the inner roads. Ferndale is everybody's concern right now, and I don't know that we can move forward without some kind of definite judgment on what's going to happen there. You guys did a good job. I sound like a negative Nelly sitting up here, but the apartments I don't have a terrible problem with. I wish they were single-family homes, but that's just me. So, but that Ferndale thing, boy, you don't get that, you're in trouble.
And in terms of, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're talking about the master plan, your sense is that there's more commercial in the plan that they've submitted than what was envisioned on the master plan?
Yeah, like I said, along M45 there, I could see some stuff. I don't know. Remember, you're dealing with Meyer too. They probably wouldn't want you to put a gas station in there, a convenience store in there either. So I don't know how you that's between private owners. So I mean, that's a thing too you got to think about. But along M45, I don't have a terrible problem with. I'd like to see it nice, and their books were nice. So.
Thank you.
So I agree with the commercial. I'm okay with the commercial along Lake Michigan Drive. The one issue I have is they reference the pattern book a lot on that. So we use that essentially as a guideline. And if you look in some of that where they give some subject examples of what the streetscapes, what the architecture would be, I get a little bit concerned. I agree with the architecture and some of the things that are going on with this that I think would look nice there. However, what happened essentially across Wilson is they just sold off the lots, and then nobody really followed the pattern book. And I would be a lot more concerned that they're not following the pattern book to what we're being presented in this particular case, because we had a bit of a free-for-all that came in with everything that's happening along Wilson, and what they're showing in here is very specific to how we should expect this development to look, and I would want something that would go along with that to move forward. And I think that dresses up the things that are going on where Tyler's frustrated behind the mire. I think if you start to introduce more of the higher end imaging, architectural, streetscapes, those kinds of things that they're showing, then it starts to work. And I don't have as much of a problem with that because of the way that the development gets done. But that's not what's happened in the past, and so I get concerned that could repeat in this particular situation.
Well,
I don't love the apartment situation either. I would much rather it be smaller density. I liked the original townhome, whole city center kind of a thing, and I really wanted desperately to see this go that direction. But they've done what we've asked in terms of moving the apartments and centering them around the water and those kinds of things. So those are positives that have come out of it, but if they're going to use the pattern book that they represent in here, then that would be my level of expectation moving forward with everything, and I just don't know how to control that.
Frank, could you speak to that?
The Westtown development, I wasn't the planner at that time either, but I think there was not a pattern book with Westtown originally. So that's why when this one came in and we started to have this discussion about consistency with the master plan, we said it would really benefit your project if you can put together a pattern book and then also a SketchUp model. And those things, if the PASP was approved, that would be part of the approval package. So in your motion, you would make sure that, however you wanted to explicitly say it, you're approving the plan set dated X, and you're approving the pattern book, and you're approving the SketchUp model. And those things would then carry forward as part of the approval. So when the individual FASPs come in, we're gonna reference right back to all that material. And then we would say, does it match or not? So we didn't have that advantage or that level of detail and architectural control over Westtown originally. So that's what we asked them to do on this site. So Westtown, the original development on the east side of M11 came in as CPUD without any of that oversight from a design standpoint.
So this pattern book, is just to clarify, would apply to both the CPUD and the RPUD zones within the development.
That's why it's broken out into two different areas. We've got different patterns for the apartment complex, the RPUD. And then I think, Frank makes a really good point. We didn't have a pattern book, and that wasn't discussed up front. I think this does give clarity, even when we're talking with potential users and say, hey, here's the look we're looking for. This is what the expectations are. We didn't have that. And I don't think that expectation was there. Now we have that, and I think it honestly makes for a really nice looking development. That's why we were probably pretty clear on it. We try to be very specific with it and try to show you guys what we were looking at
Okay,
and looking for ourselves.
thank you. Jason, any other impressions?
No.
Okay.
Not right now. I think the Ferndale thing is gonna be a big issue to get solved, and I think without that, it becomes very difficult to do anything. So it'd be one of those things I think they should probably try to tackle right away.
Okay. All right, thank you. Pat?
Just a few things. They did exactly what we asked. I like the layout as far as around the water. I still would like to see more of the commercial lots mixed with the residential, kind of like the master plan had kind of talked about, rather than just having it all separate, kind of mixing it. The talk back then was like, we're gonna have people come out of their apartments, their houses, walk to a Dairy Queen, a McDonald's, or whatever that's in this thing, rather than, okay, everything's all on the outside and the people are all in the middle. But, I mean, you do have the back of Meyer and you have the back of Blaine, so you're kind of like, what can you do there? So, I mean, that'd be the only thing I would like to see, just kind of intermix the commercial more with the residential. The outlet drive on Lake Michigan Drive, I'm never a fan of those, even though I know we need to have as many exits as we can, but, we see that right now with Westtown and everybody going in and out. Right turn only doesn't mean anything. I mean, they just fly in and out. I honk at cars all the time doing the left turn in the right lane. It's crazy. So, I mean, if we could get rid of that, that might, save some of the traffic issues coming down Lake Michigan Drive, turning on Ferndale, or into Ferndale, so. But other than that, it is what it is, and they did a good job in what we told them, so I'm pretty good with it.
Thank you. Scott?
Not a whole lot new to add. I agree. They did a good job tweaking their plan to tailor what we asked them to do. I have major concerns about what we're going to do with Ferndale. I think, like it's been said, that's got to be priority number one. Not sure how it can move forward without that resolution, but overall, I think they did a fine job with the update.
Well, where does that leave us?
Exactly, where does that leave us?
Well, at this point, the request, now, just backing up a little bit, the Planning Commission did make a recommendation to the City Commission with respect to the zoning on the property. And so that's in the parking pattern right now at the City Commission level.
It is, but given the change in the legal description, and I'm gonna look to Cliff on this, I assume we're gonna have to renotice with the updated legal descriptions and bring that back to the planning commission, because otherwise what they voted on isn't consistent with what's on the plans now.
I agree, Frank. If this was just a minor boundary line adjustment, but it seems to be fairly substantial, so to comply with the act, we should renotice it and have a follow-up hearing.
And I think from the discussion this evening, there's parts of this, even the revised plan, where there's some questions and desire for some improvement on it. And so perhaps we're looking at tabling action on it for that reason, and practically speaking, because we're going to have it renoticed, rather than, so we identify what I think we've identified a number of things that we would like to see cleaned up as we go forward, and then at a later date that has a new public hearing date is set, and then we conduct the hearing, then we can take action on what revised plan they submit back to us. So to be helpful for the developer to know just what it is we're looking for, I should have been tallying these things as we went across. Ferndale is one that, from my standpoint, as we evaluate that further, I think that, again, going back, Scott, what you had mentioned, you were just reacting like in a very limited way on traffic at that intersection. But for me, it is the ability to stack those cars that are going to be going out onto that. To me, that seems like it's a limited area right there that is asking for trouble. Is there, should that be extended further to the south so that there is additional stacking capacity there? What would that do to the evaluation of the function of that area of the site?
Well, I think one action item you could leave the developer with is to have them look at the traffic generation and the backup and the delay and marry that together with the actual layout and site plan to show you how bad it's going to be and to let us get a chance to almost model it. A lot of times we'll model traffic in a big development, and you'll be able to watch it on the screen where you can see the cars, you can watch the delays, and it's virtual, but it certainly helps, and I think that might be a reasonable thing to ask.
So from developer standpoint, is that understandable, and is that attainable as we go forward to get that type of?
We wrote it down.
Okay,
We thought, Scott thinks it is, so we're gonna take a look at it.
okay. Tyler, I think that one of the things that you mentioned was the extent to which it's consistent with the plan that's on the books.
I did, but I don't know that there's a consensus on the planning commission that to go with my direction, I mean, which I, of course, accept. I would prefer to see it go more towards the master plan, but I don't know that I would, how to put that into a tabling motion when I don't think there's consensus on the planning commission, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one thing that strikes me as we look at that graphic that showed the contrast underneath of the graphic that's in the master plan and the constraints, you can see through all that, and the multifamily that's portrayed there is not the large apartment buildings that they're proposing right now. It's more of a mixture of different sizes of so you provide for residential development on there, but not exclusively in terms of the large buildings. The large buildings, there's a comment made about the similarity between Westtown and this plan. That's one of the similarities, is that that residential is concentrated in those larger buildings. And I don't know if that would be responsive to your concern and whether that would have some appeal to the rest of the commission, that if there was that it wasn't concentrated on the larger structures, that you provide the same number of units, but in smaller buildings that would give a different feel to it. But again, that would be perhaps one way to express that. But if that doesn't match with what you're saying, forget what I said.
Well, if we don't specify it in what we're tabling here, it's not gonna happen. So, I just don't feel that there's consensus, like I said, to my view.
Okay.
And that's fine. Of course I accept that. That's what we do up here. So like I said, I hesitate to put it into a motion requiring that.
Okay.
I mean, I can put a motion out, talking about Ferndale, stacking on Ferndale there, possibly changing the road structure there so that there's better stacking. Of course, like I said, everybody agrees Ferndale is critical here. If you don't have that on paper, if we don't have it in hand, it's not gonna happen. That would maybe crash the whole thing here. So.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity here, walk me through the reason why it sounds like we want a table. Is it more because of a public notice, or because there's something that's specific to, I just want to kind of
Ferndale, I
get
think,
some clarification on that.
I think Ferndale may be the common element here, in terms of where the concern is, whether it's public or private. From my standpoint, I think that Scott worked with the MDOT personnel, and they said, well, maybe if it could be moved over 6 foot, maybe that can work. With as much importance there is on that particular intersection, why should we be given on that? It's important there, and making that 6 foot adjustment and changes in the signal timing, I think it should be much cleaner than that. So we're not getting the best design to address it now and into the future.
So I agree with you on that. My thought process on it is if that's our only thing, why wouldn't we just say, okay, we understand and somewhat are acceptable of what you have here, but if it passes a PASP, it's going nowhere without that Ferndale, so don't bother. Otherwise, they're coming in for a multiple meeting, we're sitting through a multiple hour kind of thing again, when it's very specific what we want.
We've already agreed, though, that there has to be resubmission of notice for the public hearing because it's changed.
Well, that's what I was getting at. Is that more of the requirement? So there's no reason, or it has to table no matter what. We can't vote on it because of that?
Here, and Cliff helped me out here.
That's why I'm trying to get some clarity on that.
I think you've got two tracks going on here. We need to make sure that the public notification is done, because the easiest way you can overturn any project is for someone to come in and look at the record of public notices. And if the city made a mistake somewhere along the line with the public notification, plan goes back to step one. So that's a detail thing that we always try to do as best as we can and check every box. So on this one, it's in everyone's best interest to make sure that we've got the notification right. So yes, that's something that we need to do again. Cliff just confirmed it. I agree with Cliff. We need to get that done. That's over here procedurally. Okay, so that affects what you have done previously with making a recommendation on rezoning to the city commission.
Well, that would be the stop point right there. You have to table because of that.
That's correct. That's administrative.
So then the rest, the Ferndale thing doesn't really matter in terms of the conversation. We've been specific that we want that settled up.
Yeah.
So don't come back to a PASP until you got that settled.
Well, and here's where I'd encourage, and I'll throw in some comments if that's okay with everybody. I'll try and get this as specific as possible based on what you've been talking about here. I've heard there's a concern, and I think staff shares the concern. Do we have adequate left turn stacking at Ferndale? I don't know if we've seen the answer to that. So to me, a potential condition would be the developer needs to work with staff and MDOT to come back with clarification on that issue. Is the stacking as designed going to be appropriate or not? And there are models they can do, but right now that's too amorphous. And I think that's what you folks have been struggling with. You just don't know. That needs to be clarified. So that's a very specific item. Clarify with MDOT and the city engineering department the adequacy of left turn movements from Ferndale west to Allendale, west on M45. So that's one. The other item is, what about this right-of-way issue with Meyer? What I'm hearing is, and I think staff agrees, that needs to be public. Now, Cliff helped me out here on this one too, because I realize it's off-site, but it's essential to the project. And in your zoning code, it says you need to make sure that the transportation is appropriate. Doesn't say anything about off-site or on-site, but that's where we get into legal. So I'm gonna have Cliff help us out on that. And the third thing, just so I can get out of the way, is the general question, folks, and I don't know if you want to straw poll this or not, but the first hurdle for you on this one, I think, is this consistent with the master plan or not? Staff's gonna go either way. You guys are the body that interprets the master plan. And we can go into that at various levels, but overall, I think that's the first call you have to make. The rest are technical design details. And I'll leave it to Cliff to help us out with this right-of-way issue.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, two things. One, there's so many legal issues involved with the Ferndale public versus private that I think we're probably gonna suggest us doing an opinion letter to the city. We could go on for a couple hours on all those legal issues, but now I'm gonna say something that goes to the idea of why people dislike lawyers in courts. So there's a distinction here. The courts have said, and the Developers Council has raised this, and I agree with them. Generally, you cannot condition a zoning approval on a developer improving something off-site. They only have control of what is on-site. So theoretically, you could not approve this with a condition that they have to make it public, because the half that they don't own is off-site. We all agree on that legally. But in order to approve the preliminary site plan, all the site plan standards have to be met. And 2 or 3 of the standards involve traffic, safety, circulation, and so on. So if the developer is not able to deliver the right-of-way being public on both sides, and this planning commission finds that that causes the standards not to be met, then the site plan could not be approved. So the distinction is you can't approve it contingent upon them doing it off-site, but if you believe them not doing it causes it not to meet the standards, then you'd have to turn it down. So that's a distinction that might seem a little silly, but it's a distinction the courts have recognized.
So then we could require them to have a fully active road to M45 at Ferndale, all on their property, and have MDOT agree to it.
You can't condition it because it's off-site.
Not off-site, all on their property.
Correct, if you can offset it, and I'll let, if the chair allows it, the developer address it, I think they've said yes, they would. But I'm assuming, deferring to the city engineer, that you couldn't do that because of the angles and so on. So again, you could condition it all being on their property if that worked. You cannot condition it upon them doing the public road right of way where it currently exists.
Right.
The sledgehammer would be if you feel them not providing it where it exists as all public right of way causes them not to meet the standards, that's why it would be turned down.
I warned you. All right, we've had a conversation. Frank has proposed to kind of try to coalesce the comments that we have provided. Which way do we want to go? We want to go with that and table action with, based upon that.
I'll try to put it in a motion. Case number 22-021, motion for Vista 45 preliminary site plan. I make a motion to table the preliminary site plan for the Vista 45 project pending public hearing on the changed recommendation for
The legal description.
the legal description, one thing. Another item is the Ferndale issue of public road has to be settled, or alternatives offered. The third thing is stacking onto the left turn of Ferndale, with the T road possibly not working out, that they have to model how that will work and work with staff to come to a acceptable conclusion.
Okay.
I left out the other,
Can we ask that question? Because that's kind of like the linchpin for the whole thing here. In the planning commissions, and I don't want to interrupt your motion, but maybe a little bit of discussion before you kick it around. Do you think this plan as proposed, with all the material that you see in front of you, is consistent with your master plan? Reasonably consistent?
I do.
And I'm not going to tell the chair what to do, but that from a staff standpoint, that's kind of where we're sitting. We want to know that all the work that we're going to do consistent or following up on this with the applicant's team is going to be based on, yep, you know what, it's not perfect, but we agree that it meets the master plan. Yes or no? That's up to you folks.
no. Just want my truth.
Okay, Mark?
It's a tough one. I guess it does not meet the letter of the master plan, but I don't know that there's a better alternative. So I could be persuaded to go along with it.
Yeah, I think it's a little late in the game to decide it doesn't fit the master plan. I think that should have been figured out a long time ago. I agree with some of the things that have been said, but they've done a lot of work on this thing, and I've sat through a lot of these meetings, and I think that's the least, I think this is, agrees with the master plan.
Okay. Jason?
So I think the wording agrees with the master plan. If you look specifically at what types of businesses or what types of things, that does match what it is. It's not the vision that I had for it. It's not the one that I had hoped would be there, but it, in my mind, does match what the requirements were that we were wanting originally. And I do look at that commercial side, although I don't like it, I agree with Tyler on that. The master plan does show that leg coming down as that were to be that way. So
Just not to the extent that they've taken it to the south.
that's correct. It does not go to Blaine's, only behind Meyer.
Pat?
Yeah, I agree with Jason. It's not what I want. I don't want to see a mirror image of Westtown. But, I mean, it does, somewhat meet the master plan. Does it meet what I was expecting? No. But, yeah, I'd like to have single-family homes back there, but who wants to live behind Meyer like that? So, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Scott?
Yes, I think they have met their burden with matching what's in the master plan. Not necessarily how I would draw it up, but yes, it does match up.
Okay, between the first iteration and this one, the type of uses that were identified for the M45 frontage, At that, I think that one change is that car washes have been taken out of the list that you identified. But there's one that concerns me that's still in there, that's the gas station convenience store. When you look at, it's not just the graphic of where commercial is and residential is, it goes into that, the character aspect of it. And the character of that fronting on M45 to me would not be, if it was a gas station convenience store, would not be consistent with that. And I think that, and I did ask this, they've been consistent with how they portrayed that internal street system, but if that may be a key factor that's associated with the stacking, associated with the access onto M45. And in that respect, I could see that in order to be consistent with the master plan for proper circulation to service this area, that there would be a change in the layout of that internal street system in order to be responsive to that. So that's my sense on it. So we've got generally feel it is consistent, but that's where there may be ways to make it more accepting, especially pending the feedback we get with regard to that, the stacking and layout onto for.
Then I'll leave my motion as is.
Okay. We got a motion.
I'll second it.
We have support. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Frank, what do we have coming up for the next meeting?
Well, most importantly, let's introduce our new planning director, Paula Preby. She's been helping me out and already helped me out organizing and there's a lot of moving parts here, so I appreciate her helping out tonight. Paula, I'll let her talk a little bit about herself. We're very happy to have her on board.
Hello, everyone. It is nice to meet you. I'm Paula Preby. It's my third day on the job here with the City of Walker. Nice long day. I have about a decade of experience in planning. I did my Master's of Urban Planning at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Worked for the City of Milwaukee for a time, worked in Wausau, Wisconsin. The last 4 years I've been with the City of Big Rapids, Michigan. I grew up in West Michigan in the Zeeland area, and I'm very happy to be back around here and look forward to working with all of you.
Welcome.
Welcome.
And Paula has her AICP already too, so she's fully credentialed, right?
That is correct.
Which is good. Now, Paula is entering the stream here where it seems like every major open piece of property in the city is up for development at one time. So it's going to take a while to get her there, but our next planning commission meeting on the 21st is something that I think Paula's going to help you out with. And that's going to be the Third Coast Motors that you looked at a couple of meetings ago, or maybe last meeting. They found a new site at the northwest corner of 3 Mile and Walkent, which I think is a much better site when you look at the differences in 3 Mile. 3 Mile on Fruit Ridge is a lot different than 3 Mile at Walkent. And this site would also give them 2 ways in and out, as opposed to just one long, narrow way. So that project will be on your 12/21 agenda. We will also have a ZBA meeting for a front setback on 12/28. Paul is going to help the ZBA out on that one as well. And I'll be at these meetings, but this is where I think we're going to, I don't want to get in Paula's way either and respect her professional abilities. So we're working together with Megan, our new zoning administrator as well, to get all this stuff together. And the ZBA issue is potentially knocking down the long vacant former Standale floral store that we've been trying to get condemned for years. It's very difficult to do. But the developer is proposing to take that building down and get a front setback variance which, we're not gonna give a recommendation to the ZBA one way or another, but Paul is gonna write the staff report on that one. And what else do we have? Oh, we are slowly starting to see a final area site plan for phase 2 of, the former Lincoln Lawns Golf Course, now known as, but the name is escaping me, Waterford. So 19 single-family homes is going to be the proposal, along with all the infrastructure for that.
Is that in the back, or is that,
It's the east side of Lincoln Lawns Drive.
okay.
So that one's gonna start moving as well. And then English Hills, we're working on making sure that the contractor and the people who are gonna be working for the contractor in the field are appropriately roping off all of the no disturb areas on the English Hills site. So staff's been meeting with that, and we'll do some field work to make sure that all the no disturb areas are flagged off, because it all comes down to who's driving the bulldozer. And, you can't put those trees back, and I think we all spent a lot of time developing that as more of a clustered open space development. And as part of that, we're also looking at that 3 acres in this southeastern corner that will be dedicated to the city, which folds into the last thing, which is we have draft 1 of your new Parks and Recreation Master Plan put together. So once that gets tightened up and ready for public display, we'll certainly let you see that. Because obviously you folks you need to see the parks plan. And you need to understand how that piece of the puzzle comes together in site plan review and all the other stuff we do. I think that's more than enough for me. So thanks. I thought you did a good job tonight, and I'm sorry if I pushed you a little bit on making the master plan interpretation, but that really is the whole key to this project. Now I think what Scott and I are gonna do, along with Paula, is get with those folks and say, hey, look, you need to tune up your traffic study and your traffic plan and your stacking plan here for the uses that you're projecting on these commercial sites. And you show us if you're gonna have enough stacking on Ferndale for the left turn movements. And if you don't, and if MDOT says, no, we're not giving you any additional green time, then they're gonna have to come up with a different road design. We were kind of sketching out before the meeting here, there may be 2 or 3 other options to build that road system. So, more to follow on that. Thank you.
And I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Frank, I got a question for you. Frank?
Yes.
I thought I heard some years back that the Blue Ridge overpass was
Right. Try to sneak that in.
That's a Scott
Thanks for
issue.
your interpretation.
Not yet.
Yes, insight. It's an
I think we're half adjourned. Let me put it this way. The mayor is working very hard with our representatives and senator to try to get the funding to get that done. They've been trying for years to redo the Fruit Ridge Bridge and all of the interchange. And I think Scott has worked with the mayor and past mayors, representatives, senators, MDOT, and we just haven't got the funding yet. So what you're probably going to see is MDOT's going to redo the deck of that bridge in '23, I believe, right? Is that what's on the plan?
Yes.
Yes.
I've
Which,
had a lot of people speaking for me tonight, so it's been easy. I can just sit back.
well, lean up and press that button, brother. We're getting them through, so that's where we're at. So it's certainly not what we wanted to see. It's probably, the cost keeps going up for that thing. It started at 15 million, now it's projected at 25 million. I don't, no one here is happy if they just go and redeck that bridge, but that's where we may go for the time being.
The bad news is, it's gonna be down for 3 months, and people are gonna have to detour miles and miles around it, only to come back at the end of the summer and see it looks exactly the same, it's just whiter. So, we apologize in advance.
Scott made a motion. Scott made a motion to adjourn, right? So we'll get that in the, so we are adjourned.